certification frameworks like Label Bas Carbone can be one of the solutions to fund the transition towards low carbon production system. And it's true that these payments can be an incentive for farmers. We can see that in France, we have more and more farmers involved. So today, 1,250 agricultural projects of beef and dairy farms have been certified by the Ministry for Ecological Transition, and it represents 660,000 tons of CO2 equivalent avoided.
Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's episode, we feature Anaïs L'Hote from the Irish Livestock Institute, who gave a presentation at the Teagasc National Beef Conference, discussing how farmers can be paid for reducing their carbon footprint based on the experience in France.
So, first of all, in 2015, the French Ministry for Ecological Transition published its roadmap to achieve the objective for climate neutrality in France by 2050. And one of the solutions to achieve these objectives was to create in 2018 the French label Bas Carbone. So, what is this French label Bas Carbone? So it's a certification framework to certify low carbon projects in France, whatever the sector, not only forestry or agriculture. So first of all, a decree was published in 2018 by the ministry to set the framework of this label Bas Carbone. So what is the baseline? What is the lifetime of projects? How will be taken into account the risk of non-permanence, the co-benefits that have to be taken into account too. So it's really the general framework. Then each sector has the possibility to submit a method. So experts and stakeholders verify this method that is then approved by the ministry. The first method that has been approved by the ministry is the method for the beef, dairy and crops farms. So once a method is approved, the ministry can certify local projects. Then there is an independent auditor to check the emissions reduction that have been achieved through these local projects. And then it enables citizens, companies or communities to fund these emissions reductions that are then fully recognized by the ministry. So as I said, this decree sets the baseline, the calculation method, additionality too. And the objective is really to attract funding towards French projects, guaranteeing the environmental quality of this project. It's true that today there is a growing interest for local projects, and today funders are companies, citizens, or communities. And today several methods have been approved. So as I said, in very different sectors. So 3 methods in the forestry sector, 2 in the building sector, 1 in the transport sector, 1 in the marine environment, and 6 in the agricultural sector, and I will talk about it specifically. So I talked about the carbon agri method. As I said, it's a method that was created for farms with at least a dairy, beef, or crops production unit. There are other eligibility criteria. So respecting nitrate directive with not more than 170 kilograms of organic nitrogen per hectare. And during the project certified by the carbon agri method, maintaining or increasing carbon storage. So what is the scope of this method? Here you have an extract of a result coming from the Cap2Air tool developed by the French Livestock Institute. So it's a tool to assess the carbon footprint of farms. And it's a tool that is recognized in the frame of the carbon agri method to be used for these low carbon projects. So it's based on the life cycle analysis. And here, as you can see, all the farm is taken into account to assess the carbon footprint. So not only the emissions coming from the farms, but also manufacturing and transportation of inputs, and then it ends at farms gates. So here you have the results of the Capture tool for a farm to know where do the GHG emissions come from for this farm specifically. So what is covered by this carbon agri method? So indirect emissions reduction, direct emissions reductions, and also carbon storage. So the carbon agri method also describes the follow-up steps. So it's for projects that last 5 years. So the first step is to recruit farmers and to notify the project to the ministry. Then there is a carbon audit carried out on the farm, and also a carbon action plan that is built by the farmer and the advisor, with a choice of practices to put in place during the project. Then the project is certified by the ministry, and then the farmer can implement the practices. There is a midterm control to assess that practices are well put in place, or if there is any adaptation to do. Then a final carbon audit to assess the implementation of the practices and to calculate the real carbon gain achieved by the farmer. Then there is a verification by an independent auditor, and at the end, the reductions emissions achieved by the farmer are recognized by the ministry. So here you have all the practices that are proposed in the method and that can be put in place. So practices concerning GHG emissions, so herd management, herd feeding, energy consumption, etc., and also practices that concern carbon storage, such as cultivated surfaces management or management of agroecological elements. The carbon agri method also define the co-benefits that are followed during the lifetime of the project to make sure that the projects won't have a negative impact on other environmental indicators. So we take into account water quality with the kilogram of nitrogen per hectare, air quality with the kilogram of ammonia per hectare, energy consumption, agronomy with plants cover and irrigation, biodiversity with the hectare of biodiversity equivalent, renewable energy production, deforestation with the reduction of soya consumption, and also direct distribution. So how the carbon gain is calculated with this carbon agri method? So the carbon gain is the tons of CO2 avoided thanks to this project. So we do the difference between the initial situation, so the baseline, and a situation with the project put in place during the certification period. So here we take the milk carbon footprint, so what amount of CO2 equivalent are emitted per kilogram of product, so per liter of milk or per kilogram of meat. We multiply it by the milk production. So we have the initial and the final situation, and we do the difference between the initial and the final situations to get the tons of CO2 avoided. For the crops and for carbon sequestration, we consider the area, and we have then the carbon avoided on farm scale. So the formula is simplified here, but we also, just to let you know that we also take into account the year when the practices are put in place, because when a practice is put in place earlier during the lifetime of the project, of course, it would have a more important impact on GHG emissions. So we also take into account this information. So then how do we involve farmers in low carbon strategy? So in France, there are several projects with public funds, so on regional, national, or European scales, and also France Carbon Agri projects. And I will talk about it later and explain you what is it about. Concerning the stakeholders following farmers on the field and doing all the advising, the carbon audit, technical visits, it's most of the time local organizations like chambers of agriculture, milk control, cooperatives, farmers associations, and advisory companies. So I just wanted to give you an example, a concrete example of a farm that put in place a mitigation action plan to reduce carbon footprint on the farm. So here it's a farm with 95 circular cows. And here you have some technical information concerning the farm. And the initial carbon footprint was of 14.1 kilogram of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of live meat. So the mitigation action plan is composed of 4 practices. So increasing the surface of catch crops from 12 to 27 hectares, reducing the use of mineral fertilizers, improving the sanitary conditions of animals by reducing the calving interval from 395 to 380 days, and also producing renewable electricity with photovoltaic panels. And here you have the emissions reduction. So on the right, you have extract of the Cap2Air results. So the first slide showed the results of the initial audit. And here on this slide, you can see the results of a simulation carried out in Cap2Air to see once the practices are put in place, what is the impact on the carbon footprint. And here, the final carbon footprint that should be achieved by the farmer is of 12.1 kilogram of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of live meat. This mitigation action plan also enables to reduce carbon footprint of cash crops, to reduce the nitrate surplus, and at the end to avoid the emissions of 608 tons of CO2 equivalent, including 30 tons of carbon storage and 578 tons of emissions reductions. So I will now talk about France Carbon Agri, so an example of national aggregator. So what are the roles of France Carbon Agri? So it's, in the first place, it was an association created by Farmers Association. The objective was really that the decisions regarding, for example, the price of carbon credits remain in the hands of the farmers and not, for example, not decided by downstream companies. So France Carbon Agri has the role of aggregate the dossiers of farmers, so farmers following by local project developers, and then FCAA submit them to the French Ministry of Environment to get the label bas carbone certification. So FCAA do all the administrative job of following the farmers. So it does the link with the ministry. It also does the link with an independent auditor for the final verification of the emissions reduction. And FCAA is also in charge of finding funders to pay farmers for their emissions reductions. And all this organization is formalized with 2 contracts. So one linking the farmers, the project developers, and FCAA, and another one between FCAA and the funders of these low carbon projects. So FCAA launched 4 call of projects involving around 2,500 farmers. Today, the carbon credit price is of 40 euros per ton of CO2 equivalent. So it's the carbon credit decided by France Carbone Agri. So for the farmer, it's 32 euros per ton of CO2 equivalent. The project developer gets 5 euros per ton of CO2 equivalent, and FCA 3 euros per ton of CO2 equivalent. So as you can see, the farms are located in all the country, and on average, this projects, so the third projects that have been three projects that have been submitted to the ministry, enabled to avoid around 550 tons of CO2 per farm. And the fourth project will be submitted in December 2023. So today, what is the state of the voluntary carbon market, and what are the strategies adopted by companies regarding this voluntary carbon market? So to do the link with the potential buyers of carbon credits and funders of low carbon projects, just some explanations on what is a label bas carbone certificate. So these certificates are considered as the purchase of a service delivery. So, for example, offsetting the residual emissions of a company. It can be a voluntary contribution to the climate change mitigation or a reduction on scope 3 of a company. And once bought, these certificates are not transferable to another company. So some figures concerning the evolution of the voluntary market between 2021 and 2022. So as you can see, there has been an increase of 31% concerning the tons of CO2 equivalent sold in the world, and it represents an increase of 75% concerning the value of this of the total money devolved to this voluntary carbon market. So it means that in 2022 the price of the carbon credits was higher than the year before. The average price today in the world is of 6.1 euros per carbon credit. And here you have the main certification that are used in the world. So Vera, Gold Standard, that are used today. And some insights concerning the level of trust in carbon credits system. Today, it's true that the level of trust is quite low. For example, The Guardian described a scandal in carbon credits in January 2023. So it concerned Vera carbon credits with the fact that the carbon credits were overestimated. And also what is an issue is also the lack of transparency from companies buying these carbon credits. So what about the label bas carbone? So first of all, there are reservations about it because it's not strictly speaking carbon credits, because it's considered as certificates. Also, these certificates are not transferable. And the audit is too late in the lifetime of the project to have a control on the emissions reductions really achieved by the project developers. But there are some advantages. First of all, the high quality of low carbon projects certified, and also the high level of remuneration for these projects. For example, when we compare the price of carbon credits sold by FCAA is much higher than the average price of carbon credits in the world. And today, when we look at the French voluntary carbon market, we see that only 8% of tons of CO2 equivalent avoided come from label bas carbone projects. But it's going higher through the years. So what are the companies buying these carbon credits or funding these low carbon projects? So there are banks, luxury companies, agri-food industry, restaurant chains, service companies, energy companies. And I just wanted to highlight the example of Lidl. So Lidl France decided to reduce on scope 3, to reduce the emissions, GHG emissions on scope 3 by purchasing label bas carbone certificates generated by its own beef suppliers. So it's not carbon credits because it's a reduction on the whole value chain of Lidl France. But Lidl France decided to use the label bas carbone certification because of the high quality of the follow-up of the projects certified with this label bas carbone. And what are the main purchase criteria for this company? So first of all, the price of carbon credit, farm's location, what are the co-benefits, and also the practices implemented. And very interesting information that we had this year is that voluntary carbon buyers are the companies that reduce the most their GHG emissions in the first place. So it means that this company decided before offsetting their emissions to reduce GHG emissions on their whole value chain. Now some information concerning law evolution regarding voluntary carbon market. So on France scale, there is the obligation from the 1st of January 2023 to integrate scope 3 in the carbon footprint of companies with at least 500 employees. There is also the mandatory offsetting of GHG emissions coming from domestic flights and the mandatory offsetting of GHG emissions caused by coal-fired power plants. And for this last law, the coal-fired power plants have to buy carbon credits that are coming from French low-carbon projects and, for example, from label bas carbone projects. So it is mandatory for them to offset with 100% of French low-carbon projects. And on European scale, there is the obligation of publishing a CSR, so corporate social responsibility report, every year for biggest European companies. So now I will just finish with the certification schemes in Europe. So in 2022, in November 2022, the European Commission published an union certification framework for carbon removal, so a proposal to build this framework. So it was adopted by the European Parliament this year. So this certification framework is very different. Well, there are some similarities with the label bas carbone because the major features of this framework concern quantification, additionality, long-term storage, and also taking into account other sustainability indicators. Also, the functioning is quite the same with a verification by an independent auditor, a high-quality certification method, and public registration of carbon removals. But on the contrary of the label bas carbone, it is only for carbon sequestration, so permanent sequestration, carbon farming, or carbon sequestration in products. And it means that GHG emissions reductions are not at all taken into account in this framework. And just to focus on the live carbon farming project that is coordinated by IDEL and involving Ireland with Teagasc and also Spain, Belgium, Germany, and Italy. So the objective of this project is to build a result-based rewarding mechanism that is common to these 6 countries, and at the end to pay farmers for their carbon footprint reductions. And it's true that it can give feedback to the European Commission, field feedback on how we can implement common certification framework with several European countries. So to conclude, certification frameworks like Label Bas Carbone can be one of the solutions to fund the transition towards low carbon production system. And it's true that these payments can be an incentive for farmers. We can see that in France, we have more and more farmers involved. So today, 1,250 agricultural projects of beef and dairy farms have been certified by the Ministry for Ecological Transition, and it represents 660,000 tons of CO2 equivalent avoided. And on the European scale, there will be an union certification framework for carbon removals, but as I said, without taking into account emissions reduction. So we can see that this voluntary carbon market is very dynamic, but now rules must be set for companies wishing to fund low carbon projects to better clarify the difference between offsetting residual emissions, contributing to low carbon projects, or to reducing GHG emissions on Scope 3.
That's all for this week's episode, and further details of the presentations and proceedings from the Teagasc National Beef Conference can be found on the Teagasc website, and the link is in the podcast text. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.